Hello, welcome back to At a Spec Guide. I'm Max, being filmed by my colleague Ryan behind the camera, and we today are at Nissan in Boulder. Kudos to them, by the way, for letting us film here. It's not an advertisement for them, but nice of them to let us use their lot for illustration purposes. You might see a lot of electric cars behind me. We've got Nissan Arias, their SUV. We've got Nissan Leafs all along here. This was one of the pioneering EVs, and there's still lots of them on the market. So EV supply generally is increasing. There's more discounts and more deals to be had. A year ago, with coming out of the pandemic and where the EV market was, people were paying well over sticker for electric cars. That's no longer the case. So it's exciting as a buyer, but it's also kind of overwhelming. And you might be wondering, with these new EVs, do I consider leasing or buying? There's been all kinds of loopholes and advantages to leasing, and yet leasing versus buying is a very different kind of distinct value comparison. Typically, leasing in the long term has not been super prudent. However, EVs are advancing quickly, the technology is always changing, and we've seen the market fluctuate so much with pricing. So in this video, I want to talk to you about when you would consider leasing an EV versus buying it in general, with examples like the Aria, which are, not at their most popular right now, but for you as a buyer, that might be good news. So let's talk about leasing versus buying, advantages and cons to both. So let's start with leasing. Leasing traditionally gives you a lot of flexibility. It's been a great way to, let's say, get into a new car every 2 or 3 years, whatever your term is. But it's not always financially a smart move. You're not building equity, as they say. But in the EV market, equity is a big unknown. If you've been, let's say, a buyer of a Tesla Model 3 Performance 2 years ago and you paid like $60,000 for that vehicle, you're not going to be very happy now because of where the values are. And that's just the reality of it. The EV market is wildly fluctuating. Tesla has changed their prices. The whole dynamics of the market have changed. And as a result, when you're considering financing or buying a vehicle over the long term, especially with electric cars, it's like a gamble. Okay, is it going to keep its value? In particular, electric cars, emphasize the technology. There's always gains being made in range and value and batteries on a pretty quick scale. So that means that you're just seeing quicker depreciation. It's kind of like, let's say, the original iPhone versus the 3G to the 4, right? Those first few saw such big changes and there was such a rapid pace of innovation that the valuation of the older ones decreased really quickly. No one wanted that. Whereas nowadays, okay, iPhone 13 versus a 15, yeah, it's worse, but it's not going to be like half the price, or it's not going to be a third of the price. EVs are still sort of in an immature phase like that. So if you're an early adopter or a nerd like myself or Ryan behind the camera or my boss Kyle, and you know the EV market, you like being an early adopter, you want to maybe get a good deal, buying a used EV or financing one, being in that position has been smart. But if you are a casual consumer, and especially if you're looking at vehicles like the Nissan Aria, which are just at the moment unknown quantities, they're newer entrants at the market, they don't always have the best specifications on paper, they may not be the vehicle you want to own long term, well, that's where leasing is kind of smart, because basically you are locking in, you're locking in a residual value that gives you kind of a guarantee and peace of mind and security in that respect. So you know that when you turn it in, it's not going to be a situation where you're underwater. That's nice. Of course, keep in mind all the standard things of leasing apply. There's mileage limits, so if you're a rideshare driver, if you take a lot of road trips, this may not apply to you. The other big advantage with leasing EVs has been the commercial credit. So there's a federal EV tax credit you may be familiar with, up to $7,500 off eligible EVs. The eligibility of the cars that support that has been shrinking because of increasingly strict requirements by the US government. So right now, that's like Tesla's lineup, the very newest General Motors EVs, the Volkswagen ID4, Nissan Leaf, funnily enough, and not much else. For other vehicles, however, there's been the loophole where when you lease it, it's considered a commercial tax credit, which has far fewer restrictions than the private EV tax credit. So what that meant is like Nissan or whoever you were buying an EV from, let's say Ford, you were buying a Mustang Mach-E, they would pass on the $7,500 they got from the government into your basically into capitalized cost reduction and lower your monthly payments in effect. Lots of manufacturers, Hyundai, for instance, Ford, are offering bonus cash to actually match the federal tax credit. That's money they're pocketing, that they're kind of spending to get you to buy their EVs, not money from the government. Nonetheless, it's still resulting in a price reduction, but it's not universal. So basically, keep those discounts in mind. Leasing can make sense if you're able to basically get a good lease price. There's all kinds of good offers walking around, but be careful with those monthly payments. Generally on a lease, good advice to follow is don't put a lot of money down. If they say, oh, you can get into this vehicle, this ID4 for $230 a month. Well, make sure you're not having to put $5,000 down to do that. These deals are coming fast and furiously, so just keep that in mind with the market. Now, buying an EV. Buying an EV is a big commitment, and you might be willing to take more of that equity risk. So you could consider, if you're buying an EV and you don't need an EV right now, maybe waiting. Waiting's always an option. Just like, okay, I'm going to wait for this next year's iPhone. It's going to have all of these features. That said, if you want to get into EV now, start saving money on gas because electricity tends to be cheaper, all of those things, well then of course the earlier you do that, the better. But there's no harm in waiting to see what the market brings. There's so many also compelling EVs coming, like the Volvo EX30 and just these other value options that will, I think, breathe a little bit of life in the EV market. So how can I summarize this? Well, when you're leasing an EV, you are giving yourself flexibility, and you're kind of minimizing the risk of having an EV that really quickly depreciates, maybe because the technology is considered obsolete. There's better options that come on the market later on. Of course, you have less flexible terms, and in the long term, you're not building equity in anything, so it's not always the best financial decision. When you're buying a vehicle, you're making more of a commitment, more of a choice to kind of, well, you're investing in it, right? Like this is a big purchase for you, and you are considering the charging network it's going to be compatible with. At the moment in the US, everyone is on board with Tesla except vehicles from Volkswagen and Stellantis. That may change as of me filming this video, but like that would be a big infrastructure thing to note if you're considering road tripping a lot. So like buying a vehicle, you got to scrutinize the vehicle more, make sure that specific vehicle works for you. When you're leasing, I would just chase that price, basically. Chase like what's a good offer, what's a vehicle that's gonna like meet your needs, but you don't need to go over it with a fine-tooth comb, because at the end of the day, right, maintenance and all of that is going to be included in that 3-year plan. You're not gonna have too much to worry about. Buying can be great, and like if you wanna, in the long term, save costs with an EV, that's where to go, but I would really do it if you're eligible for those federal incentives, potentially state incentives. You can get dealer cash, because the lease deals we're seeing right now on EVs are just strong. And from a monthly payment point of view, if that's not too kind of a closed-minded way to look at it, it's really cool. Yes, you're not going to have a vehicle in 3 years after that point, but you're going to be able to walk into any other manner of new EVs that may be on the market at that point, like the Volvo EX30 or like a new redesigned Chevy Bolt with exciting new battery technology, all kinds of things like that. So consider that with the EV market, which is always rapidly changing. Here we have, again, all these Arias and all these Leafs, and I think it's kind of a symbolic of where we are at this point, where right now we're kind of taking a quick breather and pause in EVs. It's like, okay, when we made a lot of these, buyers are still uncertain about it. The market seems to be changing really quickly. I think buying an EV can make sense, used EVs too, but new EVs, you gotta look out for those incentives. You really have to make sure it's an electric car you want. We're gonna make more vehicle-specific videos, specific comparisons about the offers going on, but this is just my general advice about thinking between the leasing and the buying process. If you have more to add on to this, well, please feel free to let us know in the comments. Feel free to reach out to us with your specific buying dilemma, and we might cover it in a video of its own, because there's all kinds of comparisons and matchups we want to talk about. But yeah, that's been the state of the EV market, my thoughts on it, and when you should lease versus buy.